Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bixby Library. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Cedar Winslow, and I'm the Bixby's Community Engagement Manager. I'd also love to introduce to you our fantastic Bixby volunteer, Shane Newton, who's going to be running the Zoom portion of tonight's event. As well as the president of the Otter Creek Audubon Society, Ron Payne. There he is, who kindly coordinated tonight's presentation at the Bixby. For more information about the Otter Creek Audubon Society, you can head over into the lobby and check out all our materials out there. There's also a sign-up sheet for future events just like this one, so definitely make sure you check that out on your way out. You can also fill out a program feedback form if you have any thoughts on this event or future events that you would like to see at the Bixby. I'm always happy to hear any sort of comments and feedback and suggestions you might have. And I just wanted to say, it's been such a pleasure to host this year's Cabin Fever lecture series. We've gone all the way from the fields of Ferrisburgh for the Bobolink Project to Easter Island and to Chile. And now we're going to be jaunting off along Scotland's Great Glen Way. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to Ron and to the Otter Creek Audubon Society for bringing this series to the Bixby, because it has been a real treat. I also want to thank all the wonderful audience members who are here for this event, who have been here for the past events. We had a really wonderful turnout at these events, so it's great to see that these are things that you are all really interested in. Next month, I want to invite you to a presentation by local author Josh Brooks. He has a brand new book out called Ananke Tales, The Gods, Goddesses, and Kings of Ancient Sumer. And then after that, I also welcome you to join us on Friday, May 16th for our annual fundraiser and party of the season. This year's theme is the Secret Garden Gala. For more information on those events, as well as lots of other good stuff happening at the Bixby, you can check out the flyers in the vestibule, as well as our events calendar online. The closest bathrooms are on either side of the lobby. There's one to the left of the entrance and another on the hallway right of the children's room. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Silver Feather winner, former president of the Otter Creek Audubon Society, and current volunteer, and also my father, Mike Winslow.
Thank you, everybody. So as you guys came in, you heard this song playing. Other than those that read it when we were futzing around at the beginning, anybody know what the piece was? And we can mute it now. So that song is by Rothon Williams, an English composer. It's called Lark Ascending. One day, about 30 years ago, I was awakened from my sleep by my clock radio to that song. And it was just such a beautiful piece to wake up to. And I've always wanted to see the bird, the lark, that inspired it. And that was one of the motivations for us to take our trip to Scotland's Great Glen Way. We decided to take a walking vacation because that was another thing that I've always wanted to do. As Cedar may be hearing part of this for the first time, because what we told her is this was her graduation present. Really? Oh, and notice, I'll come back to it, but notice that birding is in quotes here. This is a skylark. It's a very unassuming bird, so just you get a sense of what it does look like or should look like. Wrong direction. So first off, what is the Great Glen Way? The Great Glen Way is a fault through all of Scotland and actually extends into Donegal Bay in Ireland. There are elements of the fault all the way over into North America in New Brunswick, although it's discontinuous underneath the ocean. But it's a vertical fault, not a horizontal fault. So there's basically a big crevice across Scotland. For those of you who are geologically literate, which is not me, it formed near the end of the Caledonian orogeny between 430 and 390 million years ago. Got it all. So you can see here this line right through the middle of Scotland. That is the Great Glen Way. It's often used as a distinguisher between the Highlands to the north and the lowlands to the south. Although that's not entirely fair because there's still a couple big sized mountains on the south side. So the Great Glen Way contains lochs, Scottish for lakes. There are four main lochs. in there. The first one, as you're heading from west to east, is Loch Linney. It empties out to the ocean. We actually did not walk along Loch Linney because our walk started at the northern end of that. It's about 20 miles long and enters and discharges to the Firth of Bourne. Next up is Loch Lochy, which is a very original name. It's only 9 miles long, but it's 531 feet deep, deeper than Lake Champlain. That was our first day. Loch Oich is the next one. It's the highest point in the Great Glen Way in the Caledonian Canal. All these lochs, well, I'll get to that, that's the next slide, but the lochs are connected by locks. So L-O-C-H by L-O-C-Ks. Loch Oich is the highest point in the canal. It's only 4 miles long, 54 feet deep. And then, of course, the famous Loch Ness, the largest body of water in Great Britain by volume, the fourth largest by surface area. There's two in Northern Ireland and Loch Lomond, which are bigger in area, but because they're not as deep, they don't contain as much water. And Lake Loch Ness goes 755 feet deep. So as mentioned, these locks are connected by locks. The Caledonian Canal has 29 locks to allow boats to go from west to east across Scotland uninterrupted. There's also 4 aqueducts, which are these amazing engineering features that carry the locks, the water, the locks, the boats, the Great Glen Way Trail over roads or other rivers that would make it more difficult to navigate. They're so big that we didn't even see them on our walk because we're walking over them, and they seem like part of the landscape when we're there. And then there's 10 bridges. The largest set of locks is at Neptune Staircase, which is towards the western end, which is this picture here. At that point, there are 8 locks, lowering the water level by 64 feet over 500 yards. And we walked along that, watching all the boats queued up to head down to their next western port, mostly. This was our traveling party, the Winslow family, myself, my daughter you've met, and my wife, and then Cedar brought a friend along with her from Ithaca College, Odin Lynch. The 4 of us would take this journey. Of the 4 of us, there's one committed naturalist and birder standing before you now. That's why birding is in parentheses at the beginning of the talk. There was a particular dynamic that led to it. The walking summer, we walked for 8 days from Fort William on the west side to Inverness on the east side. Inverness is the largest city and considered the capital of the Highlands of Scotland. The 8-day trip, 7 days, we walked for 7 days. 7-day trip is here, it felt like 8 days sometimes. Typically, the trip is done in 6 days. We added an extra day because that last day would have combined the 13-mile and 7-mile, and that was a bit intimidating to us. So we kind of bagged out in the middle and came out. Overall, we had 77.5 miles of walking and observed 68 species in that time. Somehow between the time I put the slideshow together last month and now, I lost a species on eBird. They must have lumped 2 that I thought were different, but I'm not really sure which ones I lost. And I have to give a shout out to Contours, the company that we used to help us put together this trip. Contours arranged our accommodations and travel between, like if we didn't walk out into the bed and breakfast we were staying in, they arranged for the travel for us. They picked our bags up in the morning and made sure they were dropped off at the next spot. Really made the trip easy to do. And they do trips all throughout. They specialize in Great Britain and Ireland, but they do other trips in other parts of Europe too. This is a graph of the elevation changes that we experienced on our trip. We start out at Fort William, fairly low in sea level, go up a little bit with some bumps and ups and downs, a big even day where we're actually going down for a while, and then we start to climb. This is the day that scared us from the beginning when we were doing training for this, going out on walks. This day looks intimidating because of the height, but that's the one we split into 2, so it wasn't quite as scary. So this was both long and elevation-wise was quite a bit of climbing. The equivalent of this would be as if you started in Addison and went over Snake Mountain and then back over it again. So that's give you a sense of about what we were accomplishing in terms of elevation. One of the things that I loved about this trip is I didn't have to deal with this at all. This is actually in Glasgow. I always have trouble between Glasgow, Scotland and Galway, Ireland, but Glasgow, I always mean Glasgow. This is in Glasgow, a photo in Glasgow, just off Wikipedia. The one thing this my second least favorite thing about traveling and trying to do birding adventures in other places is renting a car. I hate driving a rented car in foreign places. The worst thing is sitting as a passenger while somebody else drives a rented car. So I always end up doing it anyways. But with this trip, we flew into Glasgow, just walked around and used public transportation there, took a train to Fort William, walked to the other side of the country, took a train to Edinburgh and flew home. So I never had to rent a car. While we were in Glasgow, we had a chance to sort of get oriented to Scottish culture and Scottish history. This is the Calvin Grove Museum, was one of the highlights of the trip. The Calvin Grove has two wings. One is art, which we did for fun. The other is natural history, which I did just kind of orienting myself to the organisms, the landforms, the things that we would be seeing on the walk. So it was a good way to start the trip. We arrived in Fort William and walked from our train station up to the B&B that we were staying in up here. The next day, it was a bed and breakfast. The breakfast was buffet style. That was the only bed and breakfast where it was buffet style. After that, it was always, you had to schedule like a sit down term in the meeting. Sit down time with the host to tell you. What that meant for me is that was my one chance to get up early and get out when the birds are more active. So I was up first thing in the morning, not quite crack of dawn because it was June, July in Scotland, and it's day almost, there's very little darkness. It's light most of the day. But that was the one day that I was able to stay ahead of my partners in the walk because I got up so early and got going. All along the way, there are these posts. They're fairly regularly spaced. They're always painted blue. They've got this little marker on them. Tells you you're on your path, on the correct path. You're on the Great Glen Way. The only time that any of us got lost was that first day when I was out alone in first and didn't quite find the correct trailhead. Instead of this is a sign that I never got to see because I kind of went through a neighborhood and picked up the trail a little bit down the way. So didn't quite get all of it, I guess. But there's good things about that too. So typically within about a half hour of walking, this is what my view of the trail was, with my party up here and moving further away from me and me standing way back, either listening to or trying to identify whatever birds were calling. And then within an hour or two, this was their view as I trudged up to them as they were taking a nap or eating lunch. I would get maybe a 10-15 minute start because they would continue taking a nap or eating lunch while I kept walking on. And that was pretty much how the trip went, leapfrogging each other through the day. If you're not aware of the Cornell Labs Merlin app, it was invaluable for this trip. When I'm trying to keep up with a group like that, I'm getting a little glance of a bird that's trying to hide in the bushes. There's no way I could have identified them without the sound use of this app, where if you open up the app, press record, it listens to the bird that you're watching or hearing, even if you can't see it, and tells you what the species is. I've done a lot of birding in North America and in Vermont so that I can tell a good number of birds just by sound. I don't need the app as much here, but when I go to a foreign place, a place that I'm not used to, boy, do I rely on that pretty heavily. So I have to give a shout out to that as well. Lost somebody. For example, this little brown bird, to me, I see almost no field marks on that bird. So how am I going to identify? I can't look at it and see it. It's a Dunnock. And first one. Yep, go ahead. It's got a beautiful song. Now, this isn't my recording. None of this is my recordings. None of these are my pictures, but these are all on that Merlin app, accessible by that Merlin app. It'll listen to the bird and then tell me that it was a Dunnock. And so I didn't need to pick up whatever field marks I'm supposed to get from that bird who's hiding in the bush. Even worse, some of the warblers. So apparently these are 4 different species. Visually, I can't really see a difference between them. I suppose that because it's Because it's a really good picture, the sedge warbler is a little warmer. Maybe there's more yellow in the willow warbler, but only by listening to them with Merlin app was able to distinguish them. We did find all four of these species on the walk. In fact, the willow warbler and common chiffchaff saw those every day. The garden warbler and sedge warbler, one individual each. And the garden sedge warbler was that day that I got lost right before I hooked up with the regular trail, so I'm not complaining about getting lost. Yes, and the chiffchaff, if anybody watches the Great British Baking Show, that's the song that they play in the introduction. It's the chiffchaff, chiffchaff, chiffchaff. Day one, we leave Fort William, walking along the canals. One of the other cultural highlights we got to see was the train, which any Harry Potter fans may recognize. That is the Hogwarts Express. It is actually used as a regular train. This was my view of it because I was up ahead a little bit. And this was the rest of the party's view because they got to see it right as it arrived. And this was what most of the scenery was like for day one. Walking along the canal, an old towpath, very flat, very calm. A fairly easy day to introduce ourselves to the trip. Day two, we get along Loch Lochy, so we get a little bit of elevation, but we're still not too high above the lake. Got to see some of that. And day three, if you remember back to when I went over those elevations, day three was that really flat day, hardest day of hiking we had. The reason being is that we were diverted from the regular trail because of some forestry operations were going on. So we had to go to a different trail. And that different trail consisted of paved towpaths, dirt, gravel road, not gravel roads, paved roads, macadam roads, sidewalks, and logging roads with big cobbles in them. So just the surface was so hard that we were exhausted by the time we finished day three in a way that made us really concerned about days 4 and 5, but that then turned out to be not a problem. So logging is a real big part of Scotland. Like there are forests there, but the forests really declined for quite a while till about 1911, I think was the low, no, 1919 was the low point of Scottish forestry, where they had just 5% of the country covered by forest, largely because they had decimated so much of it to fuel World War I. They began a reforestation program soon after World War I in 1919. The forestry commission was created. They now have about 21% of the country covered by forest, including quite a bit of what we walked through. And in the late early 2000s, they began shifting their forestry focus from just timber production to biodiversity production. So they have changed their practices through the years, but trees take a long time to grow. And so we were walking through a lot of these really thick woods, spindly poles that were just planted to be harvested eventually. Oh, I put that in a slide. I forgot to put this in a slide. How did I do? Plantation forestry began 18th century, earlier than I said, 5% 1900, and then decreased. Forestry Commission, timber, did it, all right. And we saw some of the evidence of logging, not only the trail that was closed for that one day where there was lots of trees, but we saw some of the trees and we're fairly close to other logging operations at the time. But the Great Glen Way is a huge revenue generator for this region. The Highlands of Scotland have a lower population density than Vermont, so there aren't a lot of people there. And so the Great Glen Way, getting the tourists to walk through their lands is a big deal for them. And they separate the forestry. They recognize the recreational potential of their forests as well as the timber values. The forests produce species that very similar to some that we know here, and this will become a theme. So this is a Eurasian wren. If you play the song. And if you walk through the Vermont woodlands in May, June, you may well have heard that song. It's very similar to our winter wren. and if we go back to the picture, looks very similar as well. So usually, originally, the winter wren, the Pacific wren, and the Eurasian wren at one point were considered one species, but they have been split into 3 species. What was really different was the abundance. If I go out to the waterworks in New Haven or something, I'll hear 1 or 2 winter wrens. Here they were everywhere. You hear multiple songs all the time, lots of them. And another species that was something we see a lot of, or at least something similar of, the Eurasian tree creeper, very similar to our ground creeper, but again, much more abundant in the forests of Scotland than they are in the forest of Vermont, or their equivalent is in the forest of Vermont. Our naturalist journey was not limited to birds. This is our photo of an adder. It was the first time I had ever seen a venomous snake in the wild. It's one of 4 reptiles that lives in Scotland and very much the most common. They're all over the place. Probably as big as your hand, maybe hand up to wrist. They're not really big. They're definitely not aggressive. Painful bite, but not life-threatening. And they really need to be annoyed in order to bite. They're not a aggressive species at all. They also have 6 species of amphibians. I was kind of channeling Jim Andrews, for those of you that know, when I was putting the presentation together. 6 species of amphibians. We did get to see the palmate newt, which is a species that goes from Great Britain to the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal. We have pictures of one of the frogs, but I don't remember seeing that. So that may have been just Cedar and Odin who saw that one. But they have 3 newts, two toads, and a frog. We got to see 2 of those 6. Another constant companion on the trip was black slugs. They're all over the place. When we finished our trip in Inverness, we were listening to a band and they were playing a song called "Let's Hold a Funeral for This Love," a breakup song, and all I could hear is "Let's hold a funeral for this slug." They were everywhere. And there were some charismatic megafauna too, some deer in this case. Deer were very common. Deer are a challenge in Scotland. The populations are really high and they make it difficult to reforest the areas of red deer, I believe. This one was a magnificent sample, kind of emerging out of the ferns around it that were taller than it. So, but we saw a number of them. I think that was the only one we saw with antlers. So. The end of day 3, we arrived at Loch Ness in Fort Augustus. Day 3 and day 4 would be along that area. Here we had to make a decision. Do you take the high road or do you take the low road? There's a reason that song exists. And we followed the guidance of our the bed and breakfast host and took the high road and did not regret it. We ended up in habitats like this on days 3 and 4 with this views of Loch Ness. This is the one castle. My one disappointment is we didn't get to see more castles. So it's kind of the best view we got of Castle Urquhart, which is the 3rd most visited castle in Scotland. It was established in the 13th century and partially destroyed in 1629. 1692, if I'm quite right. In 1919, it was handed over to the government and they began some restoration efforts, though they're certainly not full restoration. And they opened a visitor center early this year, which we didn't partake in because we took the high road. We've been on the low road. We might have seen more of that, but the scenery on that day 4 and 5 was just phenomenal. More scenery. You see that you get up, there's very few trees, the few that are at that high elevation, the few that there are scrawny, not really well developed. And the path is about the same. This is looking forward on Loch Ness instead of looking backwards. And one of the more common species up there was a European stonechat. And a stonechat and the dunnock were 2 species that we would have to go to Europe to see. But that was one of the more common companions up there. And so as we moved on from Lake Loch Ness or to the more western portion of Loch Ness, then we saw more of farmlands. Wee Harry Cool is the hairy cows, Wee Harry Cool they call them, were common along those fields. One of the things I wanted to point out is my other hat that I wear is I am transportation planner for Addison County. And one of the things I think about is why can't we have something like the Great Glenway here. First, the laws aren't quite, our laws are much more protective of private property than they are in England. England has a right to roam law so that you can cross over anybody's property. It makes it more difficult to post it. But the other thing is the transportation patterns. This is a road, and I probably should have had somebody in here for perspective, but that's just one car width wide. So instead of having to build roads that are so wide that they have to have two cars, you put in turning lanes every 100 feet or so. And that allows you to have a walking trail on the road because there's no way anybody's going to be going too fast along that road. It's just curvy, narrow, and you might run into one of those very cool or one of the deer along the way. So that's an impediment to doing something like the Great Glenway here. Not that it can't be done, but it just makes it a whole lot harder. We finally ended up in Inverness. This is the River Ness. So basically, I'm not sure where Ness comes from, but we have Loch Ness, which is Lake Ness, River Ness, which is the River Ness, and Inverness, which is the mouth of the River Ness. And so the other places we saw Invermoriston or other invers, they're all the mouth of a river. We got to the end of the Great Glenway. Our last mile or two was actually walking through the city. At first, it was just some suburbs, but we could have caught a bus, I suppose, to the end. But then we went through some of the city parks, which are really beautiful. They said these walking paths that wind through the islands of the city. We arrived on July 4th, looking forward to going out to lunch as soon as we got there. And the restaurant at the end of the trail was closed because it was 4th of July. Why the Scots are celebrating 4th of July, I'm not sure. So getting into the birds, because I did promise you some birds of Scotland. One of the reasons you always see these slideshows about Africa, India, South America, where they have these wild, exotic, tropical species. Scotland doesn't really boast of that. In fact, a lot of their species are very similar to the ones that we have here. We already saw the Eurasian wren and the Eurasian tree creeper, but here are two different species of heron. The one from Europe on your left, the gray heron, and our great blue heron. Glad they don't overlap. I'd have a hard time telling them apart. I saw one gray heron on the trip. The red-tailed hawk and the common buzzard are a little bit more distinct visually, but they fill the same niche. They're the common hawk, of Scotland. I did see some very large birds way up on the skyline that I wasn't able to identify. They may have been eagles, but they're so far away and in and out of the clouds that I had to call them common buzzards. Others things that are very similar, this is a really common bird in there on the left is the goldcrest. Heard those all over the Trotter Walk, very similar to our golden crown kinglet. And in many cases, they are the same species. Our Canada geese show up in Scotland. Our mallards show up in Scotland. Our common mergansers show up in Scotland, but they call it a goosander over there. It's the same species. Similarly, pine siskins, the same species, but much more common. I get a little bit more risky when I talk about red crossbills and common redpolls because their redpoll was different a couple of years ago, and then it got lumped into the same common redpoll we might see. So they're all common redpolls across the Arctic area. And crossbills have lots of different variations based on sound, but there is one, the only endemic bird species in Scotland that we did not see is a Scottish crossbill. And to tell the difference between a Scottish crossbill and a red crossbill, I would have had to use Merlin to listen to it. They're very similar. Another question that another thing to think about when you're in Europe is what is a robin? So our common robin, Turdus migratorius, is a thrush, member of the thrush family. The only similarity it has to the European robin is the red of the breast. And our robin goes breast to abdomen, their robin goes breast up into face. So but our robin was when settlers came here and Europeans first came, they thought it looked similar to a European robin. Completely different groups. The European robin is a flycatcher. What did I do to see her? There, okay. Is a flycatcher in the family Muscapidae. And I mentioned our robin is a thrush in the genus Turdus. But on the other hand, well, we have, at least in Vermont, only one species in the genus Turdus. We have other thrushes, but not in that genus. Scotland has 7. species in that genus. We saw the missel thrush, we saw the song thrush, we saw the Eurasian blackbird. They're all very common. They all kind of fill that niche of what a robin does, a ground feeding bird. We did not see the some of the other turtle species that were possible in Scotland. We have our chickadee, we have our tufted titmouse. They have 6 different species of tits. We saw 3 of them, the coal tit, great tit, blue tit. Again, without the Merlin, I would have had a hard time telling them apart. They're a little more visually distinct, but also quick moving in and out of bushes, so I didn't always see them. We did see the coal tit, there are other tit species that we didn't see. These are the 3 that we did get. And then corvids. Wow, like we have our crow, we have our raven, and if you're lucky, we might find a fish crow around here, but they've got 5, 6 different species of what are equivalent to crows. The rook, hooded crow, carrion crow, common raven, and Eurasian jackdaw, all of which we'd get to see. The one blank space that we didn't see was a chaw, which is a smaller crow with a red bill, but that's kind of limited to just the island, so it wasn't really in the area where we were. They have a Eurasian jay that's kind of equivalent to our blue jay, but a really big, robust bird. I think I only saw one of those, and really magnificent birds. And Eurasian magpie is the other corvid. We have magpies out west, not in Vermont so much, but a lot more corvids than we're accustomed to. Though, of course, not all species are, some species are unique to Scotland. I would have to go to at least Europe to see a bunch of these, or get really lucky to see them over here. This is only a sampling of them. I included the Eurasian blackcap because it was one of the more common birds. We saw those almost every day, a pretty little warbler flycatcher type thing. White wagtail is just a gorgeous specimen. They also have a yellow wagtail that we got to see. And then reed bunting we only saw those on one occasion in the marsh area, but it's such a stunningly pretty bird to me that I felt compelled to include it in the slideshow. So overall, our trip, this is the birding results of our trip. They're publicly available on eBird, although eBird makes it difficult to find them. The URL's at the top. You have to kind of remember that number 144339. You see, I submitted 1 checklist per day to eBird, just what we saw that day, rather than trying to do it every mile or so like I would do if I was going on a walk here. Ended up with 68, now 67 species for some unknown reason. And you're welcome to visit it. And that skylark, we did get 1 skylark, never got to see it. It was way up high against the clouds, but we did get to hear it sing. You can see it goes on and on like that. And so that was the bird that inspired the piece at the beginning of the show. And that piece was inspired by a poem. So we'll have to go back to actually get to see it. And that's the show. We did have good weather. It rained, and that's not normal in Scotland necessarily. We had great weather, and then it wasn't too hot because a couple of weeks before they'd had a heat wave. Scotland is much wetter in the Fort William western side than it is in the Inverness eastern side. And we had a little bit of rain on that day 1 or 2, but I never had to break up my rain gear. It wasn't coming down that hard, but we were prepared for much more rain. The train that we took from Glasgow to Fort William poured all that day. And there's another hike that Janice was telling me about that goes from Glasgow to Fort William. And we could see some of the hikers on that one just dripping with water. And our time that we spent in the city in Glasgow, that was quite wet. But which is one of the reasons you go to the Calvin Grove and just don't worry about it as much. But we were lucky, we were fortunate. Yes, sir.
How busy is that trail?
Great question. Not very. We, there was a running group that flew through by us one day. There were some bikers that used it, but we would go for long stretches of time without seeing anybody. We had a couple groups that we kind of leapfrogged and ended up maybe even staying in the same B&B at the end. But we're all going, most people go east, west to east because of the weather issue, because of the elevation issue. So you don't see many people coming the other direction. Once you set your pace, you're kind of on your own.
Right, we have a request to repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
No, thank you.
The first question was about the weather. The second question was about the busyness of the trail. Here,
Were you always on the sort of southeast side of the lakes? Or?
the question is on what side of the lakes we were. Most of our trip, we were on the northwest side of the lake. We did stay in Beanbridge, which is on the southeast side of for our second and third night. We stayed in the same place. But most of that was just driving there. I don't think we really walked there, but we did walk along the walks as well and could go back and forth.
So is this part of the Great Glen, part of the international Appalachian Trail? Did you see any signs for that?
The question is the Great Glen Way part of the International Appalachian Trail? I don't remember. We did not see signs, but I do believe it is. I'm not sure. Yes, sir.
Did you see starlings?
Interesting question. I don't remember if we did. If we did see starlings, they were very unusual and only in the cities. So the reason it's an interesting question because the starling that we have here in abundance is a European species, but we have lots of them. We did not see many of them. Same with house sparrows.
That's odd because I saw a documentary about Andy Goldsworthy, the famous artist. And he's from Scotland, and it took you to his hometown, and there in his hometown were dandelions and starlings. And they looked indigenous as hell.
They are over there.
And, and I thought, if you would go to Scotland, you'd see a lot of starlings.
So we may not have been in the right place. We were not in a particularly agricultural area, and starlings do very well in agricultural areas. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Did you look for the Loch Ness monster?
Of course, everybody has to look for the Loch Ness monster. We actually went to a Loch Ness museum. There's two of them in, what was the town? Was it? No, it wasn't Port Augustus. It was further along. Drumnadroch, I believe was the town, and they have the museums to it. One of them was supposed to be pretty cheesy and not updated since the 1970s. The other one was a really well done museum. It was in an old house and you were kind of guided from room to room. There was only 5 or 6 rooms, and one room is about how do you look for the Loch Ness monster? What is the history of these sort of creatures like the Loch Ness monster or the chupacabra or any of the Sasquatch or any of those? One is like, how did the rumor of the Loch Ness monster spread? Where did it come from? And how was it tied to tourism promotion? So it was a really well done museum that took you beyond the idea of there is a Loch Ness monster out there. Left me no more willing to believe that there's something in there. Yes, sir.
You saw 68 species, so my question is, excluding waterfowl, what's the potential of that, of the total number of indigenous birds?
So I think when I was looking at the list, like Scotland as a whole over time has like 480 species. A lot of those are things like an American robin that got lost, so not necessarily breeding birds. I would think it's fairly similar to here, maybe 100 to 200 if you worked at it really hard over a number of years. Definitely waterfowl was what I was missing. They have 3-4 different species of loons fairly regularly. They have a lot of shorebirds, lapwings and such that we don't see around here that just weren't in the right habitat for.
Could you repeat that question?
The question was, how many birds could we possibly see in Scotland? And I'm kind of guessing.
Just to comment, the seabirds here are quite often the ones that will get strays up here, like the ivory gull and Some of the waterfowl.
Yes, so some of those things do, some of the things that are considered more Scottish birds because they're further north can stray down here because they're straying out down from a pole rather than east-west. It's a more of a north-south migration.
That was my question. Did you see migrating birds and where did they migrate from?
June, July, we did, the question is, did we see migrating birds? And June, July, you don't, they're pretty well settled in at that point. So what we saw was mostly what was breeding in the area. In fact, that was a tension within our group of four, our group of two. When to go, because I want to go earlier in the breeding season when there's more birds. And my daughter wanted to go later when she could have more time to say goodbye to her college friends, which was fair enough. And guess who won?
You'll have to go there.
To go back. Anything else? Oh, yes.
I understand this was a inland trip, but in your travels, have you been coastal to see the puffins?
The question is, have I seen puffins? I've been to the coast of Maine to see puffins.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
But you gotta be there at the right time.
yeah, so we were probably there in July and I took one of the boat trips out and got to go on to one of the Puffin Islands and hide in the, they have little shelters for you, you just go in there and they're on the top of the shelter, they're all around. We also went out to see them at a different time in May, more in August, and there was none. So the timing does matter.
Yeah, we missed it in Maine, and it was, we took a boat tour. And it was the worst weather possible. I think we saw 2 or 3 and we couldn't even get close to them because nobody wanted to be out on the water.
I've been fortunate that with good weather and birding experiences.
I have a question from the chat. They say, interesting how the robins differ, European species versus North American species. Had seen my first robin of spring 2025 along Plains Road in Jericho a couple weeks ago along the edge of a marsh. What wildlife did you observe? Sheep, horse, goat, agriculture?
Question, so what wildlife did we observe in Scotland? We saw the deer, we saw the slugs, we saw the adder. The other group saw a fox, which I missed out on because I was behind them. There was a mouse. I don't see mice every day really, so to have a mouse running around while we're eating lunch was kind of cool. Anything else? There were definitely, in terms of domesticated, there were a lot of sheep, a lot of the. If you can't picture a wee hairy coop, it's brown, it's a very big bulky cow, very long hair, big antlers, horns on it.
Horns.
Yeah.
Is that the Scottish Highlander?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I'm not a cow person, so I know birds. Anything else? Yeah, I'm Scotch, yes. Yes.
What kind of training did you need to do to get ready for this kind of extensive trip? And then during the daytime, were you just walking all day or did you stop and listen for a while or set up a camera? What was kind of process?
The question is, what sort of training did we do and what did an average day look like? So for training, we just walked every weekend. We have a 4-mile loop out in Redport and Addison that we do on most of the dirt roads. We would do that repeatedly. I did go up and over Snake Mountain and back the other side just to see what that day was like, but it was mostly finding places to go walking and doing a lot of walking. Didn't take any specialized training, but I want to make sure that we're going to be comfortable with it. Did it take all day? There was the second day of walking took a long time. I'm not really sure why. Maybe we just hadn't figured out our pace yet, but there was a day that we had to get picked up by a car at the end of the day and our ride was getting worried that we hadn't called them yet. We were just fine ambling along and didn't have a problem. The reason that was an issue is because low population density, not a lot of tourist resources. One of the 2 restaurants in town would have been full with seating if we'd been much later. So we had to, in order to get dinner, we had to get back at a certain time. As we went on, we were making pretty good time. So that last day was an 8-mile day. So it wasn't one of our big ones, but we were in Inverness for lunch. We left in the morning and made it home for lunch. We were not getting up early. There were later days. But it was 6, 7, it was like a full day, work day of walking, but not more than that. And we didn't have to carry anything but what we had for the day. We didn't have to worry about luggage. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. We'll move out into the lobby if we do have questions.
That's a wrap on Cabin Fever Lectures 2025. Thank you all so much for coming, and feel free to ask any questions that you have remaining out in the lobby. Thanks, guys.